Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Matt Russell. I'm the acting section head for geriatric medicine. Um, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our November town hall, in which we'll be focusing on nutrition and optimal eating habits. And we have a really cool program coming live from the test kitchen in Revere. And our own Jenn McGlynn, who many of you may know from our nursing work with us, is going to be chef's sous chef, I guess. I don't know, but we're all looking forward. But first and foremost, I want to introduce our moderator, Susan Edgman Levitan. So she is the director of the Stokel Center for Primary Care Innovation and is one of our anchor leaders in the town hall program.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Russell, and welcome everyone. We were just talking about the Great British Baking Show. So this is the Great Boston Cooking Show that we're very excited about. And before we get started, I just want to share a few of our housekeeping rules. The first is that everyone on the call, except for the speakers in the test kitchen, and for me, when we get to the question part, is muted to eliminate background noise. So we don't want any, sometimes people's phones ring or people ring the doorbell or whatever. If you want to view the speaker on your full screen, you go to the gallery view in the upper right-hand corner and you'll see all the participants. And you can see everybody and the speaker at the same time. If you just want to see a different view, you just click on the view button up in the upper right-hand corner and it will let you change your picture. You can also, if your picture becomes jumpy or out of sync, click the stop video icon in the lower left-hand corner, and that will speed up your connection. If you have questions, and actually several people submitted questions today, so we'll try to address those throughout the presentation, and anything we don't get to, we'll cover at the end. But if you have additional questions, please feel free to add them in the chat, but please don't put any personal medical information there, because anything in the chat can be seen by all of us. But if you do have a medical question, please reach out to your doctor. So we'll do our best to answer all the questions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Elliot Kephart and Jenn McGlynn, who are going to be leading us through our cooking demonstration today. Elliot is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and a certified chef who provides one-on-one medically tailored nutritional counseling at our MGH Revere Health Center, where we put in a cooking demonstration kitchen a few years ago that has been quite popular. He also leads hands-on 100% plant-based cooking classes weekly, where he teaches patients how to make vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, and other plant-based foods into meals. And then we have Jenn McGlynn with us, who is a registered nurse who works in the MGH Geriatric Clinic as a triage nurse. Her love language is food, and she is always on the lookout for new recipes to try and to share with her family and friends. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Elliot and Jenn, and let's get started.
Elliot, excuse
It's
me.
almost dinner time.
Elliot and Jenn, I muted you, so please unmute. There was a little bit of feedback, so just unmute you. Perfect.
There you go. All right, can everyone hear us? Perfect. So thank you for that introduction. Yeah, my name's Elliot. I'm a dietitian and chef, and I lead cooking courses in this wonderful test kitchen. And today we're going to be going through a recipe we've done here before, which is for a wonderful fall time salad with kale, apple, onion, roasted delicata squash, a balsamic vinaigrette, and then we're adding walnuts and pepitas to get some extra plant-based protein and heart-healthy fats into this wonderful recipe. This is something that could be perfect as a side dish at Thanksgiving, or it could very easily become an entire meal of its own if we were to add some type of whole grain, especially like couscous, brown rice, quinoa, millet, barley, farro. There's a ton of them. And, you know, at home where you're not in a 100% plant-based kitchen, you could always add some type of animal protein. Goat cheese pairs phenomenally with this. If you have any type of leftover chicken or pork, that would go really nicely with these fall flavors. And yeah, we're just going to jump into it with the recipe. And while we're going, we're going to answer hopefully some of those questions everyone submitted and talk about some of those topics everyone wants to know more about. So with that first step, we want to focus on getting our delicata squash into the oven. And that's because it could take between 25 and 30 minutes for it to roast, especially if you're leaving it whole. So we cheated a little bit. We already roasted off half of it, but we're going to show you how to prepare the other half of it before we kind of magically pull out the finished product. So we have here our delicata squash, absolutely one of my favorites. You can tell by kind of like the vertical stripes. And one of the reasons I love the squash, you can eat the skin. That's just going to make it easier to prepare. And when we can eat skin, it's going to give us extra fiber in our diet. So to begin, we just want to remove the seeds and membranes from the inside. Easiest way I've found to do that is just using a large dinner spoon, and we can kind of scoop out. You always want to have a trash bowl or vessel nearby, and we're just going to scoop down to get all these seeds and stringy bits out. And this same exact technique works with pretty much any squash. Like I've done this with butternut squash, acorn squash, kind of same idea with a Halloween pumpkin even.
Yeah. I've done squash, and sometimes because it may be hard to cut this squash in half when it's raw, you can poke holes in it with a fork and pop it in the oven and cook it that way if you wanted to soften it, or you could just pop it in the microwave a little bit to soften it, and then you'll be able to cut it in half a little bit easier and clean it a little bit better. That might be a little bit of a helpful way to do it if you're struggling with your knife.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for, kind of cutting and chopping in general while you're doing that?
Well, so definitely when it comes to knife skills, there's something that kind of gets, I think, undervalued, but are so important in the kitchen. But we do also all have to work within our own physical capabilities. If knife skills or fine handwork is something that's difficult for us, there's ways we can cut up things, like by putting things in a food processor, by buying pre-cut up vegetables at the grocery store, or by going for more like frozen or canned low sodium vegetables. But one thing that is always important to know, a sharp knife, despite sounding more dangerous, is actually safer because you don't have to apply as much force to cut through things. So these are okay. They could use sharpening. But when we're cutting as well, we always want to keep our guide hand, I'm right-handed, so that would be my left hand, in the claw shape. This is where we tuck our fingertips so that they can't be cut. And then with our right hand, we just want to glide through our produce. Most American-style chef's knives, they don't cut by going straight down. They cut by gliding through, compared to some of the more kind of like Japanese-style chef's knives. So we just want to let the knife do the work. Our hand is in the claw position and lets us get these nice, even medallion cuts. And yeah, exactly like we were saying, if this is going to be a little bit too difficult to cut up, roast it first. It'll be so much easier when it comes out of the oven or out of the microwave for us to kind of get it into these little, what would you call these?
Half moons?
Half medallions? Half moons.
Moons.
I love it.
Get them roasted.
And so we're just going to toss these with some of that canola oil, which is a heart-healthy monounsaturated fat. And we'll season them with salt and pepper. And then we're going to get these into the oven where we can kind of forget about them for the next 25 minutes.
Just a little drizzle of that. And you could use other oil if you didn't have that oil, like avocado oil or olive oil if you did.
Yeah, you would not want to use extra virgin olive oil because extra virgin olive oil has a very low smoke point. It's not meant for roasting. It's exactly what we're going to use in our salad dressing, where we're going to have good flavor and all those heart-healthy fats. But yes, definitely for the roasting, you would want non-extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, canola oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, something with a pretty neutral flavor and a higher smoke point. So I always like to just give these a good mix so they're evenly coated with oil. We're going to lay them out on our sheet tray in a single layer. If you are trying to roast a whole squash or more than one at once, try and spread the vegetables out. When you have really crowded vegetables in a pan in the oven or like on the stovetop, it's going to prevent them from getting brown, because when they release steam, it won't be able to escape and instantly evaporate. So it's just going to steam your vegetables, where, at least in this case, we're trying to get some nice browning, some caramelization of the natural sugars in the squash. And we're just going to season this with some salt and pepper. Salt is a flavor enhancer. It's something that we need from our diet, and we don't want to get too much of, and we don't want to get too little of. And in this case, we just have some salt mixed with black pepper. But this is another place where you could totally add a ton of flavor and make it fit your tastes. We could use things like onion powder and garlic powder. We could add a little cumin for some kind of nuttiness. What other seasonings would you like on this? Maybe some
I was thinking a little nutmeg, yeah, and rosemary, little thyme maybe, and throw that in there. So just don't be afraid to add things up. I tell my kids, because they ask me how I make something, and I use a recipe as a guide. And then I just decide like what I look at and use different flavors, what I like. Because sometimes there might be an ingredient in a recipe that you don't like, and you can just swap it out for something else. So
yeah, whether you don't like something or depending on what you have on hand.
Right.
A lot of my ingredients for my cooking classes come from what we get in the food pantry from the wonderful Greater Boston Food Bank, or occasionally the Boston area Gleaners. So yeah, maybe we don't have the delicata squash, but we have an acorn squash. This same recipe will apply. This is more about the techniques than the exact ingredients. We're going to be using apple as our fruit today, but we could use pear. We could use something else. We could get pomegranate seeds in there, or dried cranberries. We're using walnuts and pepitas, but you could use almonds, cashews, pistachios, whatever you have on hand, whatever tastes good. And one other tip that we were talking about earlier, yeah. I do always use a timer when I'm cooking anything that has a duration. You might not stick to it like the letter of the law, but it's very good to remind you when you're doing several things at once. Yes. So I always like to have a timer going.
Easily distracted, for sure.
Yeah. And now that our squash is in the oven, we can move on to our kale. I know some people have told me that they're kind of hesitant to work with kale because they've heard that you need to massage the olive oil lovingly into each leaf.
Yeah.
It's not quite that complicated. You do want to get it evenly dressed, because that dressing helps to soften and break down the kale. And that's going to make it more tender and delicious and easier to digest. But we're going to show you how to do that without having to actually massage the dressing into the leaves. So we did wash this ahead of time. You always want to wash your produce. And I have one leaf that I want to demonstrate how to kind of de-stem kale, where the others are already prepared. Because as you can see, there's a pretty thick stem on kale. And if you were cooking it for a long time in liquid, you could eat that stem, but it does take a long time to break down and get tender. So if you're using kale raw or close to raw, you're going to want to remove that stem. And I have seen tools for this, but if your hand strength allows it, easiest way to get the stem off there is to hold it in one hand. And with your other hand, you're basically just going to be pulling off the leaves. Stem, leaves, done. So I typically do that before I wash it to make it a little bit easier to manage. And so in this case, we have all of our wonderfully washed, de-stemmed kale leaves. And we're just going to chop this up into smaller pieces because it's a little hard to bite pieces of kale that are,
it's kind of chewy. Yeah, it's kind of chewy when it's big like that and not cooked.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty underrated. I love it in a salad. That's my favorite way to eat it.
Oh, I do too. But have you ever done kale chips?
Yes, I have.
Oh, that's a great one. It's just tossing kale with olive oil and some salt and throwing it in the oven, and it gets crispy. It's really wonderful. A nice way to have some fresh produce. So we're just going to chop this into some smaller, manageable pieces. And I do also want everyone to kind of take note of the color here. It's certainly a very green vegetable, but I wouldn't call this a bright green. You'll see what I mean after we add the dressing and it softens up a bit. It's going to be much more vibrant.
You're cutting it up with the knife, but if somebody was having a hard time cutting, they could use other tools. There's small electric, food processors. They have, kind of miniature ones. They have bigger ones. Some of them just go right on your blender. Some of them you can pull by hand. They're inexpensive, but it's another way to kind of chop things up if you have a hard time using a knife. And then also you were talking earlier about having a sharp knife. They actually make a glove you can wear on your hand that you're not using the knife with, so that you're protecting your fingers. If it's just another way, if you're concerned about using a sharp, there you go.
Yeah, they have Kevlar ones, they have chainmail ones, but good for avoiding cuts, or especially if you ever work with like a Japanese style mandolin. Those are dangerous.
And that's another tool you could have used to cut that squash earlier. You probably could have used a mandolin, which would have helped you get those even cuts and slices.
Very uniform, very thin. Mandolin's a wonderful tool. And then there's also the option of they have kale that's already been usually washed and destemmed and cut up in a bag. So again, there's always kind of those options we can work with. Kale is a green that can be frozen, and a lot of people like adding it to a smoothie. Same way with spinach. But I will say when you freeze vegetables, you're not going to lose nutrients, but what you do lose is some of the texture. So if it's, say, going into a soup where that texture is not as important, frozen vegetables are perfect for that. Or if you just don't mind the texture, that's great. In terms of a salad, the kale's not going to freeze nearly as well. But the good news is, and we were talking about this earlier, you could roast this squash ahead of time. You can dress kale and have it in the refrigerator for 2 to 4 days, and it doesn't wilt like regular lettuce. It just actually gets and stays tender. And we could freeze the squash that we've made. So there are definitely ways we could kind of like prepare this or prepare parts of this ahead of time. The one thing you really can't prepare ahead of time that well would be slicing up the apple, because that's going to get brown unless the apple slices are sitting in, say, water with lemon or another acid.
And kind of preparing things ahead of time is talking about a little bit, some people have a hard time physically, tolerance wise, of doing a lot of activity at once. So those are smaller things that you could do to get some stuff done ahead of time. And then you just maybe have to cut up the kale and prepare the last minute stuff. And the other thing that we did, Elliot had everything kind of prepared and ready in one workstation. So even if you couldn't stand at the counter, you could sit at your kitchen table and kind of carry everything over on a tray, if you're able to do that, or just bring it over there so you have everything in one spot ahead of time, your tools and your supply, your food that you need, and you could sit down and cut everything and then move it to your stove or your workstation that you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even a term for that in the restaurant industry that, of course, comes from French. Mise en place, to put in place. And it's this idea of having all your ingredients ready, having all of them pre-portioned out so that you're not missing an ingredient, you have the right quantity of ingredients, you're not missing any equipment. And laying that out ahead of time can really help with kind of reducing some of that chaos in the kitchen. And we did exactly that for our salad dressing supplies. So we just have a half sheet tray here that we have our vinegar, our oil, our mustard, our oregano, and our maple syrup in, everything we need to make that salad dressing. And this is another kind of technique rather than an exact recipe. You can use any type of vinegar. You don't have to use the mustard, although it will help the dressing stay together because mustard's an emulsifier. It helps the vinegar and oil stay together without separating. You could use honey instead of maple syrup. You could use agave, brown sugar. You could also just omit it because balsamic vinegar has a little bit of natural sweetness. You could use any other herbs, thyme, basil. Doesn't have to be oregano.
Yeah. And you could save it too. You could make a larger quantity and save it in the fridge and have it for other meals.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I do love balsamic vinegar. It's absolutely one of my favorites. But also, you could also make this with something like citrus, lemon juice, lime juice, even orange juice. And if you're someone that maybe suffers from something like reflux, where a lot of acidity is kind of tough on you, feel free to replace half or more of the vinegar or the citrus with water. What's important is that we're blending the water and the oil together and creating this stable dressing. So we're going to have just under 2 tablespoons of the vinegar. We're going to have some salt, pepper, and oregano for seasoning. I will say when you're making a salad dressing at home, the more bitter the lettuce is, the more salt you need to balance out that bitterness. Unless you really like things bitter, which that's okay too. So with kale, you need a little bit more. Arugula, you need a little bit more. But if you're doing this with something like spring mix, you don't need quite as much salt.
And I think sometimes people are afraid of how much oregano, how much salt, how much, I always say I'm seasoning, I'm listening to my ancestors. I don't know. It looks like it's good enough. So I just go with that. And once you make a recipe one time, sometimes you feel like, oh, I need a little more of this or a little less of that. And don't be afraid to adjust it to your liking.
Exactly. Like a recipe is almost always going to get better the second, third, fourth time you make it, because you learn as you go, myself included. And as well, you're fitting it to your own tastes and preferences. Some of you might like more salt. Some of you might like less salt. That's okay. Some people might want a spicy salad dressing, and we'll put red pepper flakes in there. That's okay. And yes, I am not the biggest measurer in the kitchen, but if you want to, go for it. There's really no downside to it.
And this recipe I think we're making today is for, it makes 4 servings. So you can certainly half the recipe and, cut everything in half and make less of a portion at a time. If you wanted to do that, if you're cooking for one person, or if you want to share it with a friend, you can make a little more. So that's the nice thing about a recipe, is you can always change it for what your need is.
Exactly. Or you could do something like doing, a quarter of the apple, because you can really only do that for 1 serving. But you could make the kale, the dressing, the squash, and the onion, and the nuts, put them all together and keep that in the fridge for 4 days for 4 servings for a single person. And then cut up maybe the apple a quarter at a time. Could always leave it in the fridge in some lemon water so it doesn't get brown, or could just cut off the brown part. But okay, this is going to be the loud part of the cooking demo, so I do apologize for that. We have a little bit of whisking to do. And this is just so we can get our dressing kind of nicely blended. We always want to mix all our dressing ingredients before we add the oil, because as we're adding the oil, we're whisking to create this stable emulsion so that it doesn't fully separate. And the mustard's going to be helping it to stay together. The black pepper is going to be helping it to stay together. And the mechanical action really helps. And if you're doing this at home as well, you might need to go kind of a bigger quantity to make it work, but you can make a salad dressing in a food processor. You can make a salad dressing in a blender. You can use an immersion blender. So whatever tools kind of make it more accessible. The key is just, I love doing it in the shaker. I've done it in like empty herb bottles. Like you put the ingredients in there, shake it up. They also have custom containers for it. But yes, we're just going to be whisking as we add our oil.
And you were talking about kind of saving food in the refrigerator for 4 or 5 days. Is there expiration dates on food, once you have it in the fridge that's already prepared? Do you have any recommendations for people how long they can keep meals in the fridge?
Yeah, definitely if it's a protein-based food or something that has protein, which does include grains like rice, pasta, beans as well. Generally, it has about 4 days in the fridge, but if you get into the freezer, it's going to be much longer. If it's something with less protein and less water content, those are the kind of things that will last longer in the fridge, or certainly things like condiments. I always keep my nuts in the fridge so that the fats in them don't break down and become rancid. Especially good for things like walnuts.
Okay, thank you.
And so we're just going to show this to the camera as well. Even with just this little amount of whisking, this dressing is really not separating. And that's thanks to the mustard, it's thanks to the maple syrup, and it's thanks to the whisking. Yeah, that is now perfectly blended. So we are going to mix this into our kale, and then we're just going to toss it with tongs rather than massaging it. But this is what's going to get that kale nice and soft and tender. And remember, because we're going to check in on this color as it softens over these next 10 minutes. And I want everyone to kind of remember, this is the shade of green we're starting with, and it is going to get much more vibrant as it softens. So, okay, let's get our nuts and pepitas toasting in the oven. This is not a step that's required, but generally nuts and seeds will have a much better flavor when they're roasted. So we just have that kind of quarter cup in these little roasting trays. We're going to put them in this 350-degree oven. Our timer has 10 minutes left, so that's about perfect. If you do smell them start to become fragrant early, check on them. Because once we take them out of the oven, they're going to keep cooking for a little bit. And if they start to get dark brown, they're going to start heading towards a bitter taste.
And every oven's a little different. So 5 minutes in your oven could be 10 minutes in my oven. So smelling is always good when you start to smell the fragrance. Like you were saying, that's really a good idea.
Oh, absolutely. Or especially if it's something like a toaster oven that's much smaller, those will generally cook faster because there's just less ambient air.
Right.
Or if you're using something like an air fryer or a convection oven, they tend to cook things 25% 25% faster and also at about 25 degrees less.
And those are good alternatives because they're a little bit smaller portion sizes. So you're not using a big tray to go into an oven. Or if you have balance issues, getting something bigger out of the oven. I did notice that the pans that you just used were very lightweight.
Yep. And they're
some
trays.
Yeah, and some cooking, trays can be very heavy. So that's something to think about too. The holidays are coming up. So, these might be good ideas for you to pass on to your family, like that you might like for Christmas if you're interested in being able to cook and you need a little adaptation of equipment. So air fryers, toaster oven, lighter tools.
Exactly. Or they have implements for kitchen tools that can go around like your wooden spoons or other implements where they're basically kind of like these foam pads or rubber pads or silicone pads that wrap around the handle to make them thicker. So if you are struggling with more of that fine motor control, it's much easier to grip something that's this thick than something that's this thick. And so I know we said in a few minutes, but even already, if you guys can see that, that is already a much different shade of green. That's how you know the dressing's working on the kale. And the volume has already decreased by about, I would say, a third.
And it's smelling really good in here. I wish we had smell-o-vision so you could smell it, but it smells awesome.
It does. So now we're just going to get our other ingredients prepared while the squash and the nuts and seeds finish up. We have half a red onion here. When we're cutting onions, kind of the most important thing is just that you always want to keep this root side intact if you're dicing an onion. That's kind of the number one mistake I see from people in the kitchen because this root holds everything together while we dice it. In this case, where we're slicing it, it's not going to be as big of a deal, but that's why we always cut onions vertically in half. So this root stays together. And so what we're going to do to kind of get this into some nice thin slices that are nice for salad, we actually are going to violate that one rule and cut out the root side. And then because now we can just slice this into tiny thin strips. And this could be another really good use for the mandolin. I do like to slice onions vertically rather than horizontally because we get much more evenly sized pieces compared to when you kind of do like the half moon cut.
Again, if you really couldn't use a knife, using a food processor or like a little mini chopper that you could pull, it would be fine too. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be cut like this. If you can cut it a different way and you can still enjoy eating it. Don't be afraid to try different things.
Absolutely. And if you're sensitive to the flavor of raw onions, you can always soak them in cold water to get some of that onioniness out of them, but they'll stay nice and crispy. Raw onions and raw kale, these are going to be foods that are harder to digest. They are more gas-producing foods because they have these complex carbohydrates, these types of fiber that our body can't break down, but the bacteria that live in our large intestine can. And when they break it down, they unfortunately produce gas. So this is definitely one where you could also do something like cooked onions if you still want the oniony flavor, but you don't want it to be quite as harsh on the stomach. So we're just going to mix that into the kale. Next, we can cut up our apple. And so when we said earlier that we were kind of cheating, like we did roast half the squash already, just so we didn't have to wait on it or we didn't have to wait for it to cool down. This is about kind of what we're going for on the squash. We have some really nice crispy marks on it. some great browning, and it's nice and tender.
And that browning happened on the bottom side, so you won't see the top half browned, but the bottom side was browned when we took it off the pan.
Very good point. And if you want extra browning, flip it halfway through.
Yeah.
You'll get it on both sides. So we're going to mix that in. We're going to cut up our apple. And then once we have those nuts and seeds, we have complete salad going.
All right.
And so definitely when it comes to kind of like some of the nutrients that are really important for us, really at all stages of life, but especially as we age, protein, fiber, fluid, and then kind of like vitamins B12 and iron are going to be some really important ones. For this recipe, we're getting protein from our walnuts and our pepitas, some nice plant-based protein. We're getting fiber from the apple, the squash, the kale, the onions, the walnuts, and the pepitas. So a lot of fiber in this. And that's great because fiber, along with adequate water, fluid, helps prevent constipation. Certain types of fiber, like the fiber found in apples, the flesh of apples, helps to reduce our LDL cholesterol levels. Fiber can also just keep us full for longer and keeps our blood sugar levels more stable. It does a lot of good things for us. And generally, we need about 15 grams of fiber for every 2,000 calories we need in our diet. So generally, that's going to end up being in the kind of 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day range. We're just going to add our nice freshly sliced apple to our salad. Like I said, this is kind of the one step that we can't really do ahead of time. We can do basically everything else. We can have sliced onion. We can have roasted squash. We can have dressed cut up kale. We can have roasted nuts. But the apple's going to turn brown. So that's why we waited on that. And some other good things to know. Squash is going to be a really good source of vitamin A in the form of beta carotene. And vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin. That means we need fat to absorb it, which we're getting from that little bit of canola oil we roasted the squash with, as well as this extra virgin olive oil in the salad dressing. We're also going to get a little bit of vitamin C from the squash, which is really nice because it helps us absorb the iron that's in the kale better. When we have kind of like meat or fish or chicken, we absorb the iron really well. And we get things like vitamin B12, which we need. But when we have plant-based sources of iron from things like spinach, pepitas, black beans, tofu, raisins, and other dried fruit, we don't absorb it as well unless we also have a source of vitamin C.
Good to know.
Yeah, and we can get that from a lot of different fruits and vegetables, things like bell peppers, citrus, if we went with like a lemon-based dressing. It could also just be from having kind of like tropical fruits in there. A lot of different ways we can meet that need. Okay, and let's take a look at our nuts because they've been in there for about 8 minutes. Oh, that is perfect. And perfect. So it's good. We started to smell them. We checked them before that 10-minute timer was all the way up. But yeah, now we have this nice browning on the pepitas, the walnuts as well. And we got those out just in the nick of time. I'm actually going to move them to a bowl instead of in the cooking vessel so that they cool down a little bit faster.
It looks really good. And the same thing like with your nuts, you can buy the nuts already chopped up, so you don't have to worry about chopping them. Or if you like a larger piece, you could use a half, like the Walmart halves. It just might take a little bit longer to toast those. But yeah, they look really good. Or pecans would be really good.
Pistachios, expensive, but good. Yeah. Almonds are another great one because all nuts and seeds, the fat that's in them, fat keeps us full for longer. Fat is flavor. It helps us absorb those vitamins and minerals we need. And then the types of fats we eat determines like how much a food might affect our cholesterol levels. So by having more of these unsaturated fats from walnuts, from pepitas, other nuts and seeds, olive oil and the other cooking oils we mentioned, avocados, fish, those are the heart healthy fats. We want to have those more often than we want to have fat from full fat dairy, the skin of chickens, fat on cuts of red meat, and certain other fats like coconut and palm oil. And oh my God, we can hear the pepitas kind of like being crispy.
They're popping.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we're going to plate up our salad. Then we'll kind of just top it with some of these nuts and seeds. And we'll have a wonderful taste of fall. And like I said, this already has some pretty great balanced nutritional value. If we wanted to make it into a full meal, that is where we would add something like, I think farro would be a really nice one with this, or brown rice. Quinoa is a high protein whole grain.
And a lot of those now you can get in kind of individual containers that you can heat up, or something that's already kind of pre-done that you can just chop in the microwave and heat that up to add to the salad. So it's not something that you have to kind of wash and rinse and let sit and things like that. So there are some good ways to get that, already kind of done for you, and just pop it in the microwave and add it to a salad.
Exactly.
Help to make it a little easier to make a recipe and make a full meal out of it.
Exactly. And then grains as well. They're something that we want and need in our eating pattern. And they're generally pretty nice and inexpensive. So that's kind of a win-win. Let's just get a little spoon for those. And then, yeah, I'm sorry that all of you at home might not have the same taste of fall going with us, but we'll try and enjoy it for you.
Definitely. Amazing. And I'm just going to give a plug to the test kitchen here. This is if you haven't been here, it's in the Revere Health Center, the MGB Revere Health Center. This whole time I'm looking out at the ocean. I feel like somebody said earlier, I'm on a cruise in cooking. It's beautiful. And they also have, Elliot does cooking classes here on Tuesdays from 3 to 4:30. Every week, and you can just call to sign up and come in. It was so easy. I came from the Yawkey building today. It took me a half an hour to get here on the train, and that was with walking to the Blue Line station. And you literally walk out, and the door to the test kitchen is actually on the side where you come out of the Blue Line. So if you like to cook and you want to get some tips from Elliot, I would definitely come here and take advantage of this, the site that we offer. It's beautiful. They have set up so you can sit at the high top tables to do the meal prep, or you can stand as well. So there's lots of ability. Any ability could really come in and the kitchen. So thank you for inviting me here today.
Well, like, they can be hands-on. They can just be observing, kind of whatever you're comfortable with and able to do. But
and you don't have to do the dishes at the end.
That is true. I get paid too. So. Well,
all right. Thank
cheers.
you. Cheers. This looks delicious.
Happy fall salad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, good.
I wish we were there. It looks delicious. So I have a couple of questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say a little bit more? You've mentioned this a couple of times, but can you say a little bit more about food that balances and promotes good digestion?
Yeah. Well, so definitely when we're talking about balanced meals, we're usually talking about meals that meet all your body's needs, keep you full for longer, and keep your blood sugars more stable. And there's 3 things that help us do that all together: fiber, fat, and protein. So in this case, where we have the protein, it's really mostly coming from the pepitas and the walnuts. It can be a little bit harder to get our protein needs met when we're cooking 100% plant-based or 100% vegan. Sometimes you need kind of extras from things like protein powders, or just focusing on plant-based proteins that are more concentrated, like tofu or tempeh. But when we're at home, if you're not vegan or vegetarian, the protein can be things like chicken, turkey, beef, pork, fish, shellfish, eggs, and as well non-fat or low-fat dairy. So when we picture like a balanced meal, there would be a source of protein, no matter what it is, but generally we want protein at each meal. We usually have some form of grains or starch. So whether it's a starchy vegetable like potatoes, sweet potatoes, yuca, cassava, green plantains, or whether it's whole grains or non-whole grains, brown rice, white rice, whole wheat bread, white bread, pasta, quinoa, oats, barley, bulgur, farro, teff, so many different ones. That's not even all of them. And then we would also want to include vegetables. So generally when I'm counseling people about the balanced plate, we have about a palm-sized portion of protein, about a fist or a cup-sized portion of grains or starchy vegetables, and then 2 fists of vegetables. Because those vegetables are going to be high in fiber, high in vitamins and minerals, but low in calories. So they fill us up, gives us what our body needs, but helps to make sure we're not getting too much of anything else. And generally we get the fats just by including them in the cooking process, like in our salad dressing or when roasting. When it comes to digestion, that can be a much trickier question and really depends on the person. We could eat the exact same things and digest it totally differently. Some people will have foods that trigger indigestion, whether it's things like heartburn, whether it's things like gas, or whether people might not actually be able to eat fiber. And so that tends to be kind of more of a, knowing your entire medical history answer to your question. But generally the foods that will be easier to digest will be the proteins, cooked vegetables, especially without skins and seeds, fruits without peels and seeds, and more of the non-whole grains. But I wouldn't generally recommend that eating pattern unless that's something that you need. Generally, what I recommend is more of the whole grains, the protein, and the vegetables.
So can you say something more about, and this question it's 2 questions, but they may go together. People are asking for advice about what are the best things if you think about cooking, if you're cooking for one. I would add, are there any good websites or cookbooks for cooking for one? And also, what do you recommend as some of the healthiest prepared foods that people can get?
Yeah, I don't have any cookbooks or websites off the top of my head that specialize in cooking for one. Generally, though, almost any recipe, you can just modify the quantity. Like with this one, it's written for 4. It kind of says that. Cut it in half. Cut it in quarters if you want to make just 1 serving at a time. It could also be something like with this recipe where we talked about if you're eating it for 1, maybe you're making 4 days out of it, and that's cutting down on your need to cook. You just want to cut up the apple 1 at a time. So it could be something where it's like a soup or a casserole where you can just make the whole thing, throw it in the fridge, put part of it in the freezer. That can be a great way to cook for 1. It can be reducing the quantity of the recipe, or it can also just be something what I like to do on weeknights. I don't want to cook on weeknights and I don't want to cut up a whole bunch of vegetables. So I tend to cut up all the vegetables I'll need on the weekend, keep them in separate containers, and then my life is just so much easier just to add them to things on a weeknight.
So, can you say anything about your favorite prepared foods? I know one of the things that we always look for is prepared foods with really high salt content. In some places, that's their standard. Others, it's much healthier. But can you say more about that?
Yeah, not the simplest answer, but I generally like to counsel and coach through reading the nutrition facts label on frozen foods. So that way we're not kind of like beholden to one brand or one concept. What we generally want to look for, we want and need there to be protein in there. And ideally, 30 grams of protein is usually what we want at a meal. And that is about that palm-sized portion of chicken, beef, or fish. You want to look for fiber content because ideally there's going to be 5 to 10, maybe even 15 grams of fiber in there. We want to look for low amounts of saturated fat, low amounts of added sugar. And when it comes to sodium, everyone's sodium needs are going to be a little bit different, but generally aiming for below 600 is a pretty good recommendation for everyone. Some people are going to need to aim for below 400 milligrams at a time, especially if they're on like a 1.2 gram sodium restriction a day.
So do you have any favorite prepared foods that kind of meet those criteria?
Unfortunately, I don't have any off the top of my head, but the one thing I'll also add is just that plain frozen vegetables have no added sodium, no added sugar. So you can always kind of like bulk up the frozen meals and make sure you're hitting that 2 cup of vegetable serving by adding more of those frozen vegetables.
That's a great idea. So I am just looking to see We answered the question about cooking for one. Um, One thing I just want to add is I don't know if you all have any recommended places to get adaptive devices to help people with arthritis or, other issues that may, but the Right Stuff, WRIGHT website has a lot of tools, knives, and mats that you can put things on so they don't move around when you're trying to stir and cut things. They have all sorts of good equipment. But do you have any advice about sources for that?
No, I think the assistive devices themselves, there are various tools in the kitchen that sometimes are really important for accessibility, like things like garlic presses might make our life easier, or things like citrus squeezers or a rice cooker, which again, you can cook basically any of those grains we talked about in there.
Yeah.
The food processor, blender, immersion blender, there's a lot of tools that can make our life easier.
And what about, Monique, I think we've covered most of the questions, but do you have any advice about using the long cooking things, why am I blanking on, what I'm talking, like a hot pot,
Crock pots.
crock pots, or the slow cookers? Any advice about using those, or any healthy recipe sites for slow cookers or hot pots, crock pots?
Definitely, I know Instant Pot, they have some good recipes that go with them. And in that case, it's a slow cooker and a pressure cooker. But
Yeah.
yeah, with a lot of the recipes, they're very customizable because it's really just throwing all the ingredients you want in there. I always like to say there should probably be some type of grain or starchy vegetable. There could be beans in there. There should probably be some vegetables, maybe even a lot of vegetables in there. And using enough liquid to cover it at least.
Okay. Monique, are there other questions that I haven't asked that we got?
I'm going to type in a couple more, Susan. Yes. Yes. So we got another question today about easy one-pot meals. If you could offer some ideas. And then someone else had mentioned things that don't include pasta. You've certainly touched on a lot of other ideas of grains and things
Yeah.
like that. That would be helpful.
Yeah. So definitely in terms of the avoiding pasta, there's that whole other world of grains. If the pasta is something that's being avoided due to celiac or another issue where you need to avoid gluten, there's still a ton of gluten-free grains, things like corn, buckwheat, teff, amaranth, sorghum, millet, brown rice, gluten-free oats, maybe, depends on the person. But so any of those can be the good options. And then the grains that do contain gluten, things like bulgur, barley, farro. You can get like wheat berries, true whole grain wheat form. And as well, you can go with like the starchy vegetables as a source of carbohydrates, potatoes, sweet potatoes, or you can go with fruit as one of your main sources of carbohydrates. So any of those can be options. When it comes to one pot meals, yeah, most of those are probably not going to be salads, and that's okay. But a lot of soup are going to be one pot meals while it's cooking, whether it's pasta or any of those other ones. Those are going to be some of the main ones. Or like the one tray roasting sheet trays. Yeah, where it's like you have some protein, some vegetables, starchy vegetables, and just all roast together.
So we do have another question. Can you say a little bit about Meals on Wheels, food pantries, other resources that people might have to help them meet their nutritional needs?
Yeah, there's definitely some meal delivery services. There's a lot of them and kind of like local to the area. Meals on Wheels is definitely a solid one, and they can make some medical accommodations, which is really nice and helpful. Like I do have a list of some of the local resources that can help with food access, because unfortunately our food pantry here has the waiting list is over like a year and a half at this point. So it's very good at helping the families that are on it, but not as good for the people that need to be referred onto it.
Okay. And we do have a question that came in, and the question is weight loss a real factor for people that are over 92 years old?
Kind of depends on the person. At a certain age, it actually becomes more protective to have a little bit of extra weight, just because of the unfortunate circumstances of if we get sick or end up in the hospital, we want to have some weight that we can afford to lose. But it really depends. If someone's suffering health issues because of living in a larger body, because of having a higher body weight, then weight loss might indeed be a really good recommendation for things like improving cholesterol issues, blood sugar levels and insulin resistance, or just for things like joint pain. So really depends on the person.
Great. Great. Well, I think we're close to the end of our time. This has been, I'm hungry. This has been great. Matt, do you want to add any last comments?
I think this is, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Oh, I think this was just so I'm starving as well. It looks absolutely delicious. And I think that, a lot of folks are very savvy on the internet and, looking and finding a recipe for inspiration can be very, very helpful. And, you can take the time to then say, oh, how do I make this all in either one pot? Or, as I'll sometimes recommend with my families, is, if your family lives nearby, you can do a cooking Sunday or a cooking Saturday where the whole family comes over and we make meals for the week together so that it's a communal experience. Because cooking for one is a pain, but if I've cooked for on Sunday with a whole bunch of my friends or family, uh, you know, I I I have that for the week, and it's a nice little ritual because so much of nutrition, while it's important, it's also important to understand the importance of dining and having social experiences and staying connected with others. And food is the first proxy for love. And in every culture, whether you've got good cuisine or bad cuisine, food is used to celebrate and to comfort. So thank you guys so much. This has just been such a great experience to see this all taking place.
Yeah,
Thank you
it's
for having us.
wonderful.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
wonderful. So thank you. Thank you. And we will be sharing the resources that you've mentioned with everyone after the call. I think that's accurate, right, Monique? Yes. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a lovely Thanksgiving. I think I'm actually going to get off this call and start baking some cornbread for my dressing so that it's ready to go next week. So you've inspired me. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.